My room was at the front of the house with a massive window and 2 other windows on each side of it with a little sitting area attached to it. I didn't have curtains back then, but rather raggedy blinds that didn't close all the way so you could peek into my room if you really wanted to. I obviously assumed no one ever would. That thought never crossed my mind. I was sitting in my bed that was pressed against the wall where the window was when I heard knocking on the door. We had constant solicitors in our neighborhood, from AT&T to Girl Scouts and whoever else decided to bother us at that time. Usually we ignored the door because we were never interested. Not even a minute after the knocking, I hear yelling at the door. The guy has completely lost his mind, incoherently yelling and knocking on the door. Just completely losing it. I glanced out the big window and saw he had a white truck, some logo on it that I recognized as a steak company that was advertised a lot in the newspaper's coupon area or something. But what the heck though? I creep out of my room since it's closest to the front door, peeking out the peephole to see some Hispanic man swinging his arms around and flipping out. Immediately my brother and mom come down the hallway, freaking out because everyone leaves after they knock and no one comes to the door to greet them. I went back into my room and looked out the smaller window that faces the driveway, and the guy is right there at my window. He's looking at me and yelling, and I swear he says the word steak a few times, and I freak out. I ran out and told my brother, who was 16 to 17 at the time, and he lost it. He grabbed a bat from his room and opened the front door, only to see the guy in his truck was gone. He got into his car quick with the baseball bat, driving around the neighborhood furiously while my mom and I stood in the hall, staring at each other in shock. My brother eventually came home and said he couldn't find the guy anywhere. He must have booked it out of the neighborhood. But never in my life have I ever met such an angry meat salesman. This happened to my mom a long time ago when I was in kindergarten or just before. I actually totally forgot about it, despite it being the most terrifying moment of my childhood, until one day my mom mentioned it to an older sibling who wasn't there, saying that's why she always tells us, as adults, to never open the door for strangers unless our mom and dad are home, not even a bit to talk to them. One day, while me and my younger sister and mom were at home, some man came knocking on the door. At this house, the door had no windows, peeping hole, and it wasn't easy to see who was there. This wasn't a bad neighborhood at all, smack dab in the middle class, but not bad. My mom's very reserved and modest though, and didn't want to be facing a strange man without my father home, so she asked, without opening the door, who it was. He said he was by to do some repairs. At this point, my mom, knowing something was off, got afraid and just kept quiet. Nothing was wrong with the house, and we weren't expecting any type of repairs. My father wouldn't even have someone come by like this when it was just my mom and us kids at home by ourselves. He kept knocking though, eventually more violently. My mom was visibly upset and afraid, signaling to us to keep quiet. When he started to try to turn the handle and push open the door, I finally understood that this man was trying to get inside and hurt my mom for some reason. I got a knife from the kitchen and stood there, ready and deathly afraid. While he was trying to get in and yelling to let him inside, he even said, "I know your husband's not home." So evidently he'd been watching our house for some time. This lasted for a while, maybe 15 to 30 minutes. I just remember wondering what did we do that angered him so much, and being utterly terrified that he'd get inside. Eventually, thank God, he gave up and left. Of course, my mother called the police, but they arrived after he'd gone. They eventually caught the guy. If I recall correctly from what my mom was saying many years later, it turned out that the guy was a felon who had just been out of jail or something. Now I know why I have recurring nightmares, so bad that I woke up drenched in sweat, of someone trying to get in through the front door. So this was about 4 years ago when I was 16. My parents had just divorced and my mom and I had moved into a flat with my mom's new boyfriend. It was a really modern place in a good area, so no reason to worry. This one evening my parents decide to pop off to the store, and I'm going to stay at home for the maximum half an hour it will take. They leave and I go on about cooking some food. About 5 minutes after they leave, there's a knock on the door. Of course, I assume it's my parents, but I look through the peephole first just to be sure. But no, it's a middle-aged man I've never seen before. Okay, I assume it's some kind of door-to-door salesman, so I just decide not to open as I can't be bothered. But he keeps knocking, and he keeps knocking more intensely and harder now. He goes on for a few minutes and then stops. Then he starts trying with the door handle quite furiously, jamming it up and down. This isn't some confused old man who got the wrong door. That's quite clear to me already. Already at this point, I'm terrified, and in lack of anything else to do, I go sit under the kitchen table. I don't have my phone on me. He keeps jamming the door handle, and now he starts having a go at the mailbox. I can hear how he opens and closes it, and the final straw comes when he starts fiddling with the keyhole. I can hear him sticking something in there and trying to turn around. He gives that up and sticks with the letterbox. After what feels like an eternity, I'm absolutely paralyzed by fear at this point. Everything goes silent, and eventually I figure out that he leaves. This all went on for maybe about 15 minutes. I was still sitting in the same spot for God knows how long though, scared to tears. Since then, strangers knocking on my door is one of my biggest paranoias. So I'm watching TV with my sister when the doorbell rings. Being lazy teenagers, we know our mom will get it as she is reading in the living room near the door. I hear her open it, and a salesman begins talking. It's casual at first, the usual speech, and I hear things take a turn. My mother says bluntly, "Thanks, but we're fine." And the salesman responds, "Oh, ma'am, hang on. There's another aspect I would love to speak to you about." No, thank you. I said we're fine." I hear her go to close the door, and then I hear a weird sound, like a scrunch almost. Then, Get out!" My mom screamed at this guy, and then I hear the door slam. I jump up, my sister shouts, asking my mom what had happened, and I turn the corner to see my mom turning from the now locked door and returning to the couch. I ask her what happened, and she tells me the man stuck his foot in the way of the door as she was closing it, without saying a word, and that was the scrunch sound. So I return to the couch, and it's important to note here that the family room where I was connects right to the kitchen, which has huge windows that see into the backyard, as well as a back door that has windows with blinds on them. They're all closed slightly, so you can't see from where I'm sitting what's outside. Everything is normal for about 2 or 3 minutes when we hear a knock on the back door. My mom must not have heard it because she doesn't move or say anything from where she is. Unfortunately, she has bad hearing. My sister squeals slightly and I stand up, acting tough though very afraid. I glance out a window that has a side view to the door and see the salesman. He went through our side gate into our backyard and to the back door. I'm about to call the police when he sees me or sees me move from the window and shouts, "I have something to sell. Please open up." My mom flips her lid. She comes running in, yelling at my sister to move upstairs, yelling at me to go up there too, goes to the back door, whips open the blinds so she and the man are facing each other and screams, "Get out of here! My neighbor's a police officer and I'm calling him right now." Our neighbor is a cop, so she wasn't lying, and the guy came to his senses, and I guess he left. My mom told our cop neighbor and he asked around, but the neighbors said they hadn't had any salesmen at their doors recently before or after that. My parents discussed getting a security system, but after a few days and nothing happening, they let it go and just reminded us to be extra careful about answering the door. Growing up, I always had the front or back door open with a latch screen or glass door to let in light or air. I was used to that, and it never occurred to me when I got my own place to do anything else. Several years ago, when I moved into my first rental, I was just cleaning up and unpacking things, and as it was summer, I had the door open with the glass door latched. Eventually, I heard the neighbor's dog start barking, and then a knock at my door. Standing outside was a guy who looked fairly normal, although his behavior was slightly anxious. That didn't seem too weird though, because he said he was selling magazine subscriptions to make extra money. At the time, I had had more than one person come to the door saying that, although before it had usually been high school students. This guy was probably 30 or so, which made it a bit awkward. I told him I was sorry, but I didn't have any money. I closed and latched the door again, and he walked off. I actually wasn't at all afraid or nervous. I actually thought he was nervous or embarrassed to be so much older than the people who usually get jobs like that. So I went about my day, perfectly normal, got the kitchen unpacked and put away everything. I decided I didn't want to mess it all up by cooking yet, so I grabbed my keys and went down the stairs. An honest-to-God chill went up my back, raising the hairs on my arms when I saw the door. There were greasy handprints all over it. Not just handprints, but prints from a face, squished all around as the guy tried to see different angles into my house. I immediately closed the back door and locked it, then called my uncle and his son to come hang out with me for a while. Luckily, I never saw him again, but I never unlocked the glass door if someone knocked. I just talked to them through it. When I was 17 years old, I worked as a receptionist at a really large car dealership. The dealership owned about 8 new car lots and about 4 used car lots. I worked in the main office, making coffee, routing phone calls, and typing out car titles. I was a late bloomer and was starting to blossom, as they call it, meaning I had just lost my braces, no longer have stringy, oily hair, and no longer had acne, but I had really bad, ugly duckling syndrome. Anyway, there was this 50-year-old car salesman who would come by my main office to ask for files to be pulled or whatnot. His main car lot was 3 buildings away, and he shouldn't come to the main office unless he needed main records pulled. This was in the early 90s, and computers were not that sophisticated. Anyway, I would work evenings and weekends being a student, and he always made some excuse to come by the main office and have me pull files, invoices, or he'd just get some coffee. Even though he had coffee in his building, which was strange, and he would compliment me on how pretty my clothes were, how pretty I looked, and he would look me up and down. I considered myself very innocent and didn't think anything creepy of it, until he did it once too often. And one time on a weekend, he would compliment me and stand too close when I was pulling the files. We were completely alone in the office, and the way he looked at me just started setting off alarm bells. But really, he never touched me, just said how pretty I was a little too often. I was sufficiently creeped out, but didn't say anything. All of the ladies in the office were in their late 20s or 30s, but they were very protective of me because I was this little 17-year-old young thing. So one day, one of the ladies is talking about Creeper Dude and how he has 5 children, and I mentioned very casually, very timidly, "Yeah, he's always telling me how pretty I am, and it makes me a bit uncomfortable. Last Saturday, he was here with me all alone, and I didn't like the way he looked at me." Trailing off, it was just water cooler talk. Next thing I know, he's fired, and I hear around the office that all the ladies were saying what a creeper he was and how he was trying to hit on a 17-year-old girl, and how that's so disgusting and they can't believe it. They were labeling him all types of different things. No one ever called me in for an inquiry. No one ever asked me anything about him. It was all from that one innocent, timid statement that that dude was fired. I felt tremendous guilt for a long time, thinking I got a man who had 5 kids fired. Now, as an adult, rightfully so. I was 17. What is a 50-year-old man telling a 17-year-old girl how attractive she is, repeatedly and standing too close? It was just a casual, "Oh, you look nice today," and that would have been fine, but it was more than that. I am now no longer timid, and I still get the compliments and the staring and the standing too close, but I know how to deal with it now, and I shut that down quick. But back then, I was a prime target because I was so timid. I'm glad he got fired, but teenage me felt really bad about it for a long time. I was about 12 when this happened, and I'm a girl last time I checked. When I was a kid, I had some behavior issues. I threw hissy fits. When I did this, my parents literally left the house and took a drive. I was never in danger or anything. I was old enough to be home alone. It worked after a few times. Well, one time they left and I fell asleep on the couch in the middle of the afternoon. I woke up to a knock at the front door. We only ever came in the back door at that house, so anytime someone came to the front, we knew it was a salesperson or the like. I went to answer the door. It was a short man, buzz cut almost down to the scalp, clean shaven, wearing Dockers and a green polo shirt with no logo or name tag. He was holding a spray bottle with some liquid in it. "Hi, are your parents home?" I was groggy and a bit confused as to how long I had been napping. I said, "No, come back tomorrow." I don't remember if he said anything before he left. I didn't think much of it. Later my folks came home. I apologized for being a brat and completely forgot. The man never returned. A few weeks later, I was visiting my grandparents' house. At the time, my great-uncle was living in a back room in the house near the back door. He suffered a brain injury as a child and as a result has a very low IQ and functions at about a 5 to 8-year-old level on average. And this is important. I was in the front den with my grandmother talking when we heard a faint knocking. I got up to see what was happening. I heard the knocking at the back door. Now the back door at this house, you can't see it from the road. The house is surrounded by a huge solid wood wall. You have to round the gate, open an iron gate, and walk around the house to get to this back door through the garden. I walk through the house to the back door and see the same salesman. Same clothes, same spray bottle. I answer the door. "Hi, are any adults home?" I shrug. "Nope." My great-uncle comes to the back door with his little pet dog to take her for a walk. "What about him?" He doesn't talk to Salesman," I say. Needless to say, this guy pushes inside and starts to talk to my great-uncle. I go through the house to get my grandmother, telling her that some guy is trying to sell something to my great-uncle. I stay in the den while she goes to the back door. I don't think anything is strange other than I swear it's the same guy from a few weeks ago. I live in a town of about 60,000 at the time. It's not beyond the realm of possibility that over the course of a month, a group of salespeople were going through different neighborhoods, and it was just a matter of chance. To this day, that's what I'd rather believe. A few minutes later, my grandmother comes back. "That guy was strange." "Yes, he really wanted to sell that spray bottle to Uncle John," I say. "I'm not sure. When I went out there, he started looking really nervous. I told him that Uncle John wasn't able to understand him. The guy refused to tell me what he was trying to sell and just left." To this day, I have no idea if it was a coincidence or if this person was up to no good. Around the same time, my grandfather had a stalker of sorts. He was a bigwig at the local university who would leave strange phone messages about coming for him. That never really lasted long, and Grandpa seemed convinced it was either a prank or the stalker meant to stalk someone else. Either way, the same salesman with nothing but a spray bottle appearing at 2 homes I was at weeks apart. The older, wiser me is just glad my stupid responses of admitting my folks weren't home didn't end in a darker turn. When I was about 2 years old, my mom and I were home alone during the mid-morning while my dad was at work. At the time, we lived in a smallish southern community. Definitely not a big city, but also not a small town, everybody knows everybody kind of thing either. Just the right size. So anyway, that day a man comes knocking on the front door. My mom goes to greet him, figuring it's nothing too concerning. He says he's selling children books and would like to show us what he has available. Now, bear in mind that I was a kid some decades ago, so this wasn't as automatically skeevy back then as it would be now. My mom lets him into the living room and shuts the door behind him. As soon as she does, the guy opens his briefcase and pulls out a gun. And the weird thing is, this is where my memory kind of comes to a screeching halt. I remember this much of the scene for most of my life, but it wasn't until I was an adult that I asked my mom what happened afterward. She told me that she panicked and immediately ran as fast as she could to the back door into the neighbor's house, which was probably a good plan, but she left me in the living room with the man with the gun. She says it was only after she was on the phone with 911 that she realized I was still back in the house. Against the warnings of the neighbor who was letting her use the phone, she came back in to look for me. She says everything was fine, except that I was now sitting on the floor watching cartoons on television when the TV had been off before. The man had taken off, presumably when he realized that my mom had called the cops. I still don't remember what happened while I was alone with this man. I'm assuming it was nothing, except that for some reason, he turned the TV on. This all happened when I was about 11 or 12. It was a regular day and I had just gotten home from school and was working on my homework when I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't home alone. My older sister was home as well, so I went ahead and opened the door. It was a portly man wearing a cowboy hat and holding a flyer in his hand. Turns out, he was a meat salesman and was trying to get a good sale from someone in the neighborhood. He seemed nice, but I still had an inexplicable bad feeling about him. He asked if my parents were home, and me, being a dumb kid, said that they weren't, but that they would be back in a bit. He said in that case he would come back later, and left. As he did, I noticed that he had a truck with one of those camper-like things on it, supposedly to keep his product frozen. At the time, I didn't think he would come back and was just trying to get rid of him. Not long after, my sister drove me to my taekwondo lesson, and afterwards we got something to eat and headed home. As we turned onto our street, I noticed the same truck from before, leaving and driving down our street. The meat salesman. I told my sister that that guy had been at our house earlier and didn't think anything of it. As my sister and I rounded the cul-de-sac and parked in our driveway, we noticed that the truck had stopped at the end of our street and reverses up the hill to come to a stop right in front of our house. The man didn't leave and just remained in his truck. Now, me and my sister are kind of silently freaking out. She calls her boyfriend at that time, who was working as a cop, and tells him the situation. He recommended we made a break for it to our house. Meanwhile, I'm crying and freaking out and feeling guilty, thinking that I have unintentionally sicked a creepy meat salesman on me and my sister. But to make matters worse, my sister realizes that she has lost her house key. We were now stuck in our car with the creepy guy outside waiting in his truck. An hour or so passed and me and my sister calmed down a bit, until the man, who still hadn't left, got out of his car and leaned on the hood, apparently waiting for us. After a few minutes, the man finally walked over to our car, coming up to the window on the passenger side, my side. He held up his flyer from before and began to speak through my rolled-up window. My sister, out of pure adrenaline, interrupted him with a loud, "No!" while shaking her head. The man then simply turned around, got in his truck, and left. My sister and I were very relieved, if not still a little shaken up. By the time our parents got home, it was dark. They let us in the house and we told them our story. They found the whole situation humorous, but me and my sister sure didn't at the time, even though we do now. Although it still weirds me out how long that man waited for us to get out of our car. Hey friends, if you enjoy the channel and would like to support me further, please consider supporting on Patreon, where for $1 or more a month you'll have early access to all future uploads and many other awesome rewards. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you again soon.